What's up everyone, and today I'm bringing a deck profile on my Infernity. Now, Infernity is a really cool deck, and it's a deck that definitely has a lot of potential. Because in this specific build, there's been multiple times where I've gotten up to 8 negates. You heard me. 8 negates. And to be honest, even its own downside rarely comes up. Sure, of course, with how Archfiends work, sometimes your hand trunk can be the most desirable, but that's just how Infernities are. So without further ado, let's get right into it. I run the 1 Infernity Archfiend. Konami, please bring it back to 2 or 3, because definitely having more of that will help. Infernity Archfiend is pretty cool. Now, the one thing about all the Infernity cards is that you have to have no cards in your hand to activate their effects. Sometimes that can be easy, sometimes that can be difficult, but in the build I made, I've tried to make sure that I was able to have no cards in my hand as quickly and consistently as possible. So Infernity Archfiend, when it is special summoned, you can add 1 Infernity card from your deck to your hand, and that is a soft once per turn. Like all of the older Infernity monsters do not have a hard once per turn on their effects. So if you monster reborn it, you can use this effect again, which is a really cool thing, because the next card, which I run 3 of, 3 Infernity Necromancer, is a monster reborn. If you have no cards in your hand, special summon an Infernity from your graveyard, except Necromancer. And basically in this deck, we can bring it back at say maximum maybe 3 times, or sometimes even bring back 2 of them twice, so you can just keep lean climbing and getting even more advantage. Like, it's actually pretty easy to even go into Saryuja Skuldred with this, which we do run. Next, I run the 1 Infernity Conjurer. Definitely really important. Conjurer is essentially your discard fodder, because when it's in the graveyard and you have no cards in your hand, you can special summon it from the graveyard, which is definitely pretty cool. You can, let's say you summon the Infernity Archfiend, you can go into your barricade board blocker, discard Conjurer off of blocker's effect, and then during the end phase you can grab your launcher back. So that's definitely pretty cool. Also run 1 Infernity Mirage. I cut this down to 1 because there's going to be times where it's like really good and times where it's awful. And this is definitely a card I would say I'd probably rather not open. I say ideally what I'd want to do is summon this off of the Skuldred's effect to special a monster from hand, because then you can attribute it to special summon 2 Infernity monsters from your deck. Or not your deck, but your grave. So if you got 2 Necromancer in the graveyard, you attribute Mirage, special summon both of them, and then both of them can reborn an Infernity monster, except Mirage, because Mirage cannot be special summoned from the grave. Which kind of sucks, but if it could be summoned from the grave, then there'd probably be a loop with this. I run 1 Infernity Patriarch. Patriarch, if you control no monsters or no cards in your hand, you can special summon it from the hand, so that's mainly why we run this. It can be like an extender in the same way as like Conjurer. Also run the 1 Infernity Wildcat. Wildcat, it comes up occasionally, but it can also be a bit of a deck card. If it's your only Infernity monster and you need no cards in your hand, it's going to be stuck in your hand. But if you have multiple Infernities, like if you have 2, then this card works, because you can special summon this card to the field by discarding an Infernity monster. Next, I run the 1 Archfiend Harris, or Hyrus, however it's pronounced. Essentially, whenever it's sent to the graveyard by card effect or being destroyed by battle, you can add 1 Archfiend card from your deck to your hand. So, okay, Infernity Archfiend. Sometimes you'd rather have it in the grave, sometimes you can get it to the hand and still get it to the grave. I run 3 Tour Guide from the Underworld. Tour Guide, when it's normal summoned, you can special summon 1 level 3 Fiend monster from your hand or deck, but negate its effects. Definitely really good, especially because it's also you can also special summon from the hand. So like, let's say you have 2 Tour Guides, then you can use the Tour Guide to summon the other Tour Guide, which would be pretty good, because then you don't have that Tour Guide kind of clogging your hand up. Also run 1 Phantom Knights of Ancient Cloak. Banish it, search Fogblade. We do play a small Phantom Knight engine in this, and by small I mean small. I run some dangers, like 2 Nessie, a Jackalope, Tsuchinoko, 2 Mothman, 2 Bigfoot, and 1 Chupacabra. And a little bit when I was practicing with this deck at my locals, I definitely noticed a problem to where I end up with cards stuck in my hand. So I decided to increase the dangers, because before it was just 2 Nessie, 1 Jackalope, 1 Tsuchinoko, and 2 Mothman. So I added 2 Bigfoot and a Chupacabra. That way, basically in almost any scenario, you can essentially get cards from your hand into the graveyard, special summon a monster, and draw a card. Dangers are just really powerful. Moving on to the spells. First, I got one Infernity Launcher. Fortunately, this card is at 1, but I can kind of understand it because in the ideal scenario, this card is a free Apollousa. This card is... I definitely would like to see this card back at 3 because this card does so much for this deck. It's really it's the best card. Easy, hands down. Like most other the Infernities, is auto hard once per turn. So you can send this card to the graveyard and then target up to 2 Infernity monsters in your graveyard, special summon them. So it's a monster born for 2 Infernities. Imagine you summon 2 Necromancer from the grave. Then you can use the Necromancer effect to special 2 more from the grave. See? Free Apollousa. Not to mention you'll also get the Infernity Archfiend Search on top of that. And it can be searched out through Infernity Archfiend. I run 3 Royal Legacy Succession and 1 Monster Born. You definitely want to have cards that can summon monsters from the graveyard, because these are extenders on legs in this deck. Because like I saw with the Launcher, summon the Necromancer, which can then summon the Archfiend, which can then search your card. So essentially, summon, search, summon, search, summon, search, summon, search. And you can just keep getting cards to your hand like the Infernity Barrier. So you can get like a back row full of just all kinds of negates. Also run 2 Void Apocalypse. Originally I had it at 3, but I cut it down to 1 because I kept seeing hands where I'd open 2 of it. Or, you know, I need a top deck and then I draw Void Apocalypse. Void Apocalypse is definitely really cool. Discard a card to send a fiend, so essentially you can discard any card in your hand. It could be a danger or a card that's kind of just sitting there. And then you can just send the Archfiend Harris, which can then add the Infernity Archfiend, or you can just flat out send Infernity Archfiend. It really depends on what you want to do. You want cards in grave, so of course you gotta run the Foolish. Now I'd also like to point out that the number of cards I'm running is higher than 40. Originally I was keeping that at like the standard 40, but I kept running into problems where I draw like the one-ofs, so I added a few more cards, kind of like help space things out a little bit. And the card I added was 3 Allure of Darkness. Now, you might be thinking, that's draw power. You could end up hurting yourself with this card. Yes, that is true. You can potentially hurt yourself because you can draw into, like, let's say a tour guide, and it'll just sit in your hand. But you got ways of getting rid of it, like Barricade Board Blocker or the Void Apocalypse. Not to mention, Allure of Darkness can banish one dark monster from your hand, and if you don't have any, you can banish 1 dark monster from your hand. So, like, let's say you just banish that tour guide, for example. Not only can it give you draw power, but can also get rid of the cards that you don't want in your hand that are just going to stick in your hand. And because this is a higher than 40 card build, then the ratio of you drawing it into a monster off of Allure of Darkness is much slower because I have more spells and traps than I do monsters. I run the 1 Call by the Grave. A hand trap can really stop this deck cold. With this being a combo deck, unfortunately, a well-timed hand trap can do it in. Like if they ask the Infernity Archfiend or Valor Imperm the Necromancer, or Ghost over the Launcher, you're not in the good spots. Because that will essentially shut your plays up. Moving on to spells. I run 3 Infernity Barrier. Infernity Barrier, when an opponent activates a spell, trap card, or monster effect, while you control a face-up attack position Infernity monster, negate the activation. If you do, destroy that card. And the cool thing is that this is a counter trap. Droplet, no problem. Dark Ruler, ha. Drill Attack, doesn't matter. It negates anything, and you can't really respond to it unless you have something like a Solemn Judgment. So they're very limited in your responses to Infernity Barrier. Not to mention you can search out multiple copies of Infernity Barrier since the Infernity Archfiend does not have a once per turn. Most oftentimes I end on a board with 2 barriers, sometimes 3. And also maybe some Fog Blades to back it up as well. I decided to put a Phantom Knight engine in here just because going into Rusty is really easy, and it just gets more negates to the field, so I'm like, why not? Lastly, the only hand trap I run, 3 Imperm. I don't run hand traps like Ash, Valor, stuff like that, because they're just not good in this deck, because you have to have no cards in your hand, and those will sit in your hand. At least with Imperm, you can set it face down. If you want to play like something like maybe Forbidden Chalice, that's also an option as well. Or even something like Droplets. So I was thinking about putting Droplets in the main deck, but then I just kind of decided not to. I figured that's best in the side. Just because going turn 1, it's not really going to do anything because you can't really activate it to discard cards. So it's not really going to be doing much. But if you're going second, Forbidden Droplets just becomes really good. Moving on to the extra deck. I run 2 Sharbini, Foolish a level 3. That's more or less it. Sometimes you'll send the Archfiend Harris, sometimes maybe Phantom Knight, it could very well be Danger, or another Infernity. Like, we got a lot of level 3, so you definitely got a lot of options. Of course, the one Rusted Bradish, really good. Easily the most powerful Phantom Knight card. It's second to Fogblade. Considering this card can get you 2 Fogblades. Also run 2 Blocker. I half run it just because it's a Link 2, and I half run it just because it's a way to get the Infernity launcher back. Considering we only have 1 copy of it. Next, I run 1 Dark, as well as 1 RP. Just some Link 2s that I can easily go into. Next, I run a Saryuja Skull's Red. Saryuja Skull's Red is really good in this deck because not only can you, if you use 4 cards for the Link summon of it, you can draw 4 cards and place 3 on the bottom. But you can also summon a monster from the hand if you use 3 monsters. And usually we'll use at least 3. Sometimes we'll get lucky and we'll be able to do 4. But it really depends on the scenarios which one you want to go for. Like, there's some areas where I don't need the draw 4, I just need the spell summon monster from hand. And there's some where it's the opposite. Also run an Apollosa. Pretty easy to make in this deck, as well as an access code to help close the games out. Next, I actually have a new card that, honestly, people are really sleeping on. Like, I heard someone say it's a terrible card, and I'm just like, have you read this card? And that is Ashura King. Ashura King is really cool. While this card has materials, you can attack a number of times each battle phase up to the number of materials attached to it. And at the start of the damage tab, it also gains 200 attack. Additionally, when another monster effect is activated, quick effect, you can detach material from this card, negate the activation. If you do, destroy this card. Or destroy that card. So not only is it allowed to attack twice, get a little bit of a boost, it's also a negation on top of that. I really like Ashura King because, like, most of the rank 3s I just didn't really think were all too great. Yeah, you got Break Sword, yeah, you got Legionnaire, Downer and stuff. Like, there were some nice cards, sure, but I just didn't think there was anything really reliable. Now we got a rank 3 that we could just easily reliable on anytime we want to put out a rank 3 or a rank 3. Ashura King would definitely be the way to go. Of course, I also have the Phantom Knights of Breaksword, and I also run 1 number 3 Cicada King. Probably pretty rare to see Cicada King in something that is not insects, but you don't really need insects to get the negate. Now for the special summoning of an insect from the graveyard, obviously you would need an insect for that. But you just need to detach 1 to negate the activation. So it's kind of like Ashura King, it's a negate, but I'd say Ashura King, you're going to go for more than Cicada King. Also run the 1 Zeus, because it's Zeus. And lastly, 1 Synchro in Desert Locust. Infernity Wildcat is a tuner. It's the only tuner we run. Going into Desert Locust isn't going to be quite as likely, but there might be scenarios where you can bring it out, or it might be beneficial considering Desert Locust can just discard a card from your hand. So if you got like an annoying card in your hand, you can just discard it off of the Desert Locust effect. Now let me know what you think of Infernity. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's got a lot of potential. Well, you can put update Negate, so it's definitely got potential. Let me know in the comments and I'll see you in the next video I make. Bye.